Alright, welcome back to my videos on the history of beat 'em ups. This one here is part 3. If you haven't seen the first two videos, I left a link to both in the description below. On this video, I will be taking a look back on the late part of the 1990s. In early 1991, Capcom released Street Fighter II, the one-on-one fighting game that would revolutionize the entire arcade industry for years to come. The massive boom in one-on-one fighting arcades would eventually start to eat away at the beat 'em up genre and its sales, as well as physical arcade territory. It was very common to see 4 to maybe 6 arcade cabinets of Street Fighter II in your local arcades, as well as other one-on-one fighting game cabinets. This reduction in space meant arcade owners had to make decisions that would best profit them. The one-on-one arcades were pretty much money printing machines back then, no doubt about that, so the decision was pretty much an easy one for the owners back then. Other arcades, including beat 'em ups, were relegated to optional at best, no inclusion at worst. As seen in my last video, Konami was one of the first big arcade developers to exit the beat 'em up genre, as this trickle-down effect continued its pace during the mid to late 1990s. They would continue to make arcades, just not the beat 'em ups. Would more developers follow that route? Let's find out.
Sega's next-generation gaming platform, revolutionary sports and arcade gameplay, all with amazing new 3D experiences never before possible on home game systems. Wow.
Now, the Sega Genesis was on the final days of its life in 1995, but that was no reason to let it go without another great hit for the console. Comix Zone was a great beat 'em up that combined comics with a fresh gameplay mechanic. You weren't just fighting as a superhero or a comic book character, but you were now doing so inside the comic book pages. You progressed in the game by traveling from one comic book panel to another. It was something completely fresh, considering we had seen so many variations of the beat 'em up games up to that point. The game did have a brutal difficulty, but the new perspective on this aging genre assured that you would probably take another crack at it time and time again. It's a good one. Now, in my previous video, I covered Guardians of the Hood, an arcade by Atari that tried to combine digitized graphics onto a beat 'em up game. The result was not entirely the best, but the effort was there. Batman Forever on the Super Nintendo tried to close that gap when it was released. Acclaim developed a graphics engine that allowed for the use of digitized graphics to be utilized not only visually, but allowed for a much smoother gameplay experience. Well, smoother when compared to Guardians of the Hood. It was far from perfect, but it was a work in progress, and the game had you playing as Batman or Robin as you followed the premise of the movie by the same name. This game was also released on the Genesis, the Game Gear, for the PC, and yeah, even the R-Zone. Now, if you were a kid between the ages of 6 to 14 in the mid-1990s, then you were most likely watching the Power Rangers TV show. It was a huge deal. So when the TV show culminated on a movie being made in 1995, sure enough, a game followed that very same year on the Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Gear, and the Game Boy. Now, this one here that I'm playing is the Genesis version. The game was nothing revolutionary, but it was a solid beat 'em up for those still hanging on to their aging 16-bit console or handheld console. Now, before we leave the very lightly populated year of 1995, here are a few other beat 'em ups from that year.
Yo, listen up.
We will not live in a two-dimensional world.
We won't go in one direction
Or sig where we can zag.
We will walk through walls. We will take a look around us.
we will not be confined.
We believe in the path of least limits.
We won't be told how to view the world.
We will experience true freedom.
We will not compromise.
We will live the game through our hands.
We will be in control of something.
We will change the system.
1995 was not a busy year for the genre. The pinch was being felt for the past 2 years now, and the titles of beat-em-ups was slowly dwindling. With the release of the next generation platforms, PlayStation and the Saturn, 3D was now in the minds of gamers everywhere. So it's no surprise when Die Hard the Arcade was released on this very same year. The next revolutionary step was now taking place. Die Hard was the first beat-em-up game to use 3D graphics and textured map 3D polygons. It was developed by AM1 in conjunction with STI. Sega had acquired the rights to the Die Hard franchise but had no games developed at the time of the acquisition to take advantage of that. The game actually was going to be originally set on a 2D plane before Sega utilized their excess inventory of STV boards to create a 3D style beat 'em up. Now, for those of you out there not familiar with STV, it stands for the Sega Titan Video System, and it is basically an arcade board that was modeled after the Sega Saturn motherboard architecture. In Japan, the game was titled Dynamite Deca and would see a sequel produced in the near future. In the meantime, let's just sit back and enjoy this fun arcade-paced beat 'em up. Now, even though Die Hard had broken the 3D plane for beat-em-ups, there was still room for the traditional 2D ones. Acclaim brought the Batman name into the arcades with Batman Forever, the arcade game. It was actually Acclaim's first arcade cabinet, and it utilized the Sega Titan technology I just mentioned. This game had some good gameplay and frantic pacing, and this beat-em-up was actually a blast to play as either Batman or Robin, or you could play two players co-op. It got ported to the Saturn and the PS1, but if you wanted the full experience without any missing animation frames and so forth, the arcade was the way to go. Now, little known trivia is that this one here was going to be released on the Jaguar CD, but we all know what happened with that. Treasure had developed some great games up until 1995, and they did so again on the Sega Saturn when they released Guardian Heroes. Now, this traditional 2D belt scrolling beat 'em up combined RPG elements along with branching paths to give players lots of replay value. You could go at it alone or with friends. The RPG aspect allowed you to pick up and choose how you would use the experience points gained from your battles to upgrade your stats. The game also had a one-on-one battle mode to kind of spruce things up a bit, and it had 3 different planes to battle on. The graphics were colorful, and Treasure took their expertise with 2D sprites to deliver a graphical gem when most developers back then were committed to making 3D games, which were all the rage. But by doing so, they cemented this game as one of the all-time great beat-em-ups slash hack and slash games. Hot on the heels of Guardian Heroes, Appaloosa Interactive here brought another solid title to the Saturn when they released 3 Dirty Dwarfs. This one was kind of odd because you can control all three dwarves, but you basically had only control of one of them at a time, with the other two following close behind you. And this is one of those games where it's a one-hit kill, so anytime an enemy hits you or any type of projectile hits you and your dwarf goes down and immediately gets swapped to the next dwarf. Once all three are knocked out, it's game over. But as long as you had one dwarf standing, you can also use him to wake up the other two dwarves. You could collect skulls from fallen enemies or boxes to use as currency to purchase special moves. This unique take on the art style and humor of the game gave this one another unique take on the genre. It was not revolutionary, but the gameplay mechanic was very unique. And to this day, there are only two ways to play this game: on a Sega Saturn or on a computer. Now, whichever of the two you choose, you get a great title and a nice addition to the beat-em up library. The Super Nintendo was also on its final days, as 3D was in full swing in the mid-90s. Capcom decided to give the Super Nintendo owners one more brawler to add to their library before Nintendo switched gears to their next console. War of the Gems was a brawler set in the Marvel Universe and closely tied to the Infinity Gauntlet and Infinity War comic storylines. You got to choose from 5 different superheroes as you battled your way through each stage in search of the Infinity Gems. As you collected the gems, they unlocked special abilities, with the last one being the Mind Gem, which was held by the Mad Titan THEINNOCENTSINFUL himself. The graphical artwork was similar to the Marvel Superheroes arcade cabinet game, and if you were a fan of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, or just comic books in general, this game here hit that sweet spot.
Panzer Bandito. Story Mode.
Panzer Bandit here was another example of a 2D type brawler. Released only in Japan, this little known beat 'em up from Fill-In Cafe played a bit similar to Guardian Heroes over on the Sega Saturn. You had 4 characters you could choose from, but you could unlock up to 8 more characters. Now, like Guardian Heroes, you could also switch between the back and front planes with a touch of a button. The game had some nice anime style cutscenes to tell the story of humanity living on an Earth with limited sources of energy. The game took advantage of that 32-bit power with extremely colorful and cartoon-like graphics and plenty of scaling effects to make it feel like a Neo Geo game, but it wasn't. It was only on the PlayStation in Japan. Now Capcom was still determined to bring us great beat 'em ups in the arcades. They never disappointed. Battle Circuit was their latest entry in that year. While beat 'em ups were on a severe downfall as the end of the 90s commenced, Capcom took us back to the crazy golden age of this genre. The game supported up to 4 players simultaneously and tied to it a very silly over-the-top story about a group of bounty hunters set on taking down the evil Dr. Saturn. The characters were heavily inspired by comic books and the manga scene. You could choose from 5 very different characters, ranging from a cyborg-looking hunter to an ostrich and even this green-looking alien thing. The entire game was pure fun and over-the-top mayhem, only as Capcom could deliver. This small, known arcade was only released in Japan and Europe, unfortunately, and wouldn't see it hit the console side until 2018 as part of the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle. When people throw the word hidden gem around, this right here is the proper definition of that. So Panzer Bandit showed us what the PlayStation could do with 2D games, but this next one here reminded us why the 32-bit systems existed. 3D and core design gave us Fighting Force, the answer to Saturn's hit Die Hard. This title was originally pitched to Sega as a possible successor to the Streets of Rage franchise, but when it was turned down, the team at Core decided to release it on the PlayStation under its new name. Now alongside Die Hard, this game here was an example of where developers were going as the genre slowly pivoted to the 3D format. In it you could choose from 4 different characters, and during the gameplay you could choose what path to take as you progressed, giving it more replay value. The pacing and overall speed of the game was not as hectic as its 2D counterparts, but that was expected as 3D engines were still new and experimental in those days. The game sold well, and a sequel will be released in 1999. So there wasn't much of a selection if you were a beat 'em up fan in 1997, but here are a few more. Sega was one of the few companies still giving us beat 'em up fans something to look forward to. Spikeout was as close as the Streets of Rage franchise would get to a 3D representation back then. This arcade was made using the Model 3 Step 2.1 arcade system board, the same board that was used on Daytona USA 2 and Star Wars Arcade, to name a few. The action was fast-paced and the graphics looked pretty clean and sharp. Didn't offer branching paths or any other element used on the console side of the beat 'em ups to prolong replayability. It was basically an arcade game and it was not afraid to own up to that fact. It was fun. Now Sega would go on to release a couple of more versions of this game but this one here is the one that started it all for Spikeout. Crisis Beat by Soft Media here was released on the PlayStation over in Japan and in Europe. The game allowed you to choose from 4 different characters. Now the story revolves around some terrorists boarding some kind of a cruise ship or something, and next thing you know, they start to kill passengers. Naturally, as a passenger with no guns or any sort of tactical gear, what do? You decide to engage the fully armed terrorists. Now luckily, they decide to fight you hand to hand, so the odds are even at that point. Lucky you. The PS1 didn't have many options on the beat-em-ups, but if you managed to get your hands on this one, it offered an average brawler experience, nothing big. But with so little selection available at that time, this was better than nothing. Now, Sega had a hit with Dynamite Deca in Japan and decided to do a sequel to it with no ties to the Die Hard franchise outside of Japan. So Dynamite Deca 2 was released internationally as Dynamite Cop. This title was actually made using the System 2 board, the same one used on Virtua Cop and Sonic Fighters. The mission was to save the president's daughter from the same bad guy that appeared in the first game, and he went by the name of Wolf Hongo. That's a pretty cool name, I like that. You mostly fought on a cruise ship and on a deserted island. Not a revolutionary step for the genre, but 1998 only had these 2 beat-em-ups, so So here we are, the end of the millennium. But 2D was not dead. No, not yet. Gaia Crusaders proved just that. Developed by Noise Factory, the same folks who will go on to make other great titles like Metal Slug 4 and King of Fighters Maximum Impact, the graphics on Gaia were very impressive and detailed, and the gameplay was complemented by some pretty good tight controls. Noise Factory showed us that with all the attention and praise 3D was getting, 2D still had plenty to offer for gamers, especially in the beat-em-up genre. Another little-known arcade hit that never got the console treatment, unfortunately. Now, Fighting Force 2 here took everything from part 1 and magnified it tenfold, just like a sequel should. Better graphics, better gameplay, better controls, I can't go on. No, I'm just kidding. It didn't do any of that. In fact, it got rid of all but one of the characters from the first game, Honk Manson. What if you liked one of the other 3 characters? Tough. They're not here. Get used to it. The gameplay focuses more on stealth now and plenty of gun action instead of fighting. Although you still have fighting moves, otherwise it wouldn't be on this list, but the graphics are about the same as the first one, but since stealth is integrated more into the gameplay now, many of the levels are darker all around too. This game underperformed in gameplay and sales, and because of this, a third part that was in development when this one was released got cancelled. And so the Fighting Force franchise ended with this title. How am I supposed to pronounce this name? I don't even know. Vamp X half or one half? Not even one half, it's half. Whatever, it's an odd looking title from Danby. The sprite-based belt-scrolling beat-em-up was released right around the end of the 90s, September 1999 to be exact. It had 4-player characters to choose from and 2 players could play co-op. Some sites online also state that there's a 4-player cabinet, but I wasn't able to find more information on that. The art style was actually an odd choice for this one. The characters all have these big heads and pretty good animations, giving the game kind of like a cartoony, colorful look. It just looks odd though. And your characters could actually gain upgrades and change to more powerful forms, kind of like in Dragon Ball Z. And they all had a good amount of fighting moves at their disposal. It was an odd game that never saw the light of day on any major console, and it was released only in Korea and Europe. Supposedly this game is based on a comic book, but again, I can't find that much information on it either. The game did manage to get a release on PC in 2000 after some delays. And this pretty much ends the 1990s and the millennium. After experiencing the golden age in the late 80s and into the early 90s, the genre quickly started fading as the decade came to a close. The introduction of the 32-bit systems and the one-on-one fighting genre slowly eroded its impact on both sides of the aisle. Arcade owners went with the safer bet of filling their local spots with Street Fighter II cabinets and other one-on-one fighting cabinets. And on the console side, gamers were now able to expand beyond the limited space of cartridges, so developers took full advantage of this, and their games were much more complex and aimed at giving gamers longer playing experiences beyond what regular brawlers could offer. So beat 'em up titles were rare and few in between towards the end of the 90s, and most were pretty standard and didn't offer much in revolutionizing that genre. 3D had been the next big frontier for the past few years, and developers were looking to expand on that technology. As we head into the 2000s, would 3D be the saving grace for this once thriving genre, or would it finally be left to slowly wither away? Stay tuned for part 4 and the new millennium. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I introduced you to some new games along the way as well. So stay playing, stay watching, and until my next video, take care of yourselves.